So far, my secret seems to be hoard all the first basemen. So,
Well, then it seems to be working out well because you need more than one when your main first baseman breaks his ankle dropping pig shit out into the
yeah,
into the river.
exactly. So, yeah.
Welcome to the GM's Corner, a Brewster Baseball Association podcast where we put general managers on the hot seat and get all of their secrets. And then, of course, I cut all of those out so only I can use them to win more. I am Ron Collins, the general manager of the Yellow Springs Nine, and today I am sitting down with Vic Caleca, who, as everyone knows, was at one time the Chicago Black Sox general manager, but is now the assistant to the assistant to someone who might be the general manager of the California Crusaders. Welcome here, Vic. I appreciate that, no matter what your position title is. Thanks for spending some time with me here today.
Oh, you bet, Ron. It's good to be out of the Kokerschmelz office waiting room.
Yeah, the move from the Chicago sludgy area into the California sunlight has got to be like a breath of fresh air for you.
Oh, I tell you, nothing like it.
And getting out from under that Vinnie Vitale has got to be something special.
Vinny's something else, that's for sure.
Well, maybe we can talk a little bit about that as we go. Did I pronounce your last name correctly, Caleca?
It's Caleca, yes.
Caleca. Well, then maybe I pronounced it wrong the first time and right the second time. I'll pronounce it multiple ways.
You know, the odd thing about our family is that, different wings pronounce it different ways. My dad always pronounced it Caleca. My uncle always pronounced it Caleca. So, just, so long as it's in the ballpark, that's great.
Just don't call me late for dinner, right?
Yeah, exactly.
There you go. Maybe give me a little bit of a background on who Vic is. I know you're a journalist by profession and retired now. How did you get into journalism, and just how did that all work out?
Oh, well, that actually started back in high school. I was actually started out, my big extracurricular was I played on the football team. And I was, really a miserable football player. But one of my, in fact, actually, I used to get put in one-on-one drills with a guy who ended up getting a full ride to the University of Wisconsin as a fullback. So they would put me in these nutcracker drills where he would just basically launch. And he'd just pound me into the turf. So I got to the point where I basically just did the Matador and let him through. And so at that point, I found myself on the bench pretty much. But one of my English teachers came to me and said, you ought to consider signing up for the school newspaper, which I did, and just found I absolutely loved it. And senior year, I was editor of the high school paper, and ended up going to Northwestern Medill School of Journalism for college. Worked on the student paper there. Got a couple of internships in Lafayette, Indiana, at the Journal and Courier. And when I graduated, I went to work for a small paper in the suburbs of Chicago called the Elgin Daily Courier News. Worked there for a year, and then went to the Indy Star, and I worked there for basically 28 years, doing everything from police beat to the science and medical beat to city editor to assistant managing editor, and it was a great career, lots of fun. And when I finally retired, boy, things seemed really quiet.
Yeah, I'm sure all the whole world of journalism is all about pulse and moving forward and hitting deadlines and getting editions out. So that's quite a big shift.
Yeah.
What were your favorites and call them least favorite parts of your of that role?
Well, actually, I really enjoyed. We had something called the State Desk, and I was a general assignment writer on the State Desk, which meant you could cover basically anything that interested you outside of the Indianapolis metro area, which was basically you had the entire state as your playground. And so I covered everything from plane crashes to a guy at Ball State University who had a kind of a wacky theory on these Indian mounds in a state park called Mound State Park that he was convinced wasn't like a burial mound, but it was actually an observatory keeping track of the stars above. So I spent about a week and a half with him, and that was just utterly fascinating. I think he's probably a little nuts, but it was really interesting to hang out with a professional archaeologist for a while.
Well, I can't imagine from your writing on the forum, I can't imagine that you like the offbeat, weird, unique kind of stories.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I will say that of all the stuff I remember, that's the kind of stuff that comes to mind. So.
Oh, sure, and that makes total sense. It's interesting to hear your conversation about Northwestern and Lafayette and Indianapolis. It sounds. I mean, we had very similar stomping grounds. I spent most of my growing up time actually in Louisville, Kentucky, but I worked in Indianapolis for about 9 years. My dad and my daughter are Purdue graduates, so I spent a lot of time in Lafayette. We absolutely adore Chicago, and I've had some things going on at Northwestern University. So, I mean, I am 100% certain that I have read or been impacted by your work in the Indianapolis Star.
Well, I apologize for that. So.
Well, we'll just have to get you back by making you suffer through more BBA stuff.
Well, the BBA, as Chicago has shown, is certainly a breeding ground for suffering. So,
and oddly resilient. It can deal with people like us and still charge on for 70 years. That's exactly. That's something. Maybe talk to me a little bit about how you found Out of the Park and how you found the Brewster and just kind of background with the game itself.
Okay. Well, actually, Out of the Park, I've done baseball simulations, from board games to computer games, pretty much, since I was a kid, starting with APBA and, but basically all these kind of historical simulations. And it was really more I've been on kind of a never-ending quest to right the wrong of 1969 and see if I can get the Cubs to the World Series in '69. And I don't know how many simulations I've done of them, and have never, ever gotten them to the series.
There is, of course, absolute poetic justice around that.
So that was my I can't remember what number it was, but it was in the single digits. It was a fairly early incarnation of OTP. And I played it quite a bit, but mostly just, historical simulations here and there. And, after a while, it just got kind of boring. And it was kind of looking on the forums one day and saw actually saw an ad for PIBA, which was, obviously, as you well know, a fictional league, and I applied for a franchise there and got in, and and I'm still a member of PIBA, but I kept hearing about this crazy other league called the Brewster, and kind of went looking for it online and found it, and I got to say, just the rich wealth of history of the league was just kind of an irresistible magnet. Because what I really like about the fictional leagues is, you sort of build this little universe around you, and you can kind of make of it what you will. But on the other hand, the game helps you drive the narrative. So that was just irresistible. So I applied for a spot and ended up in Mumbai in the Amoeba. And the absolute great thing about Mumbai was at that point, no one had written any TNs for it. It was just an empty TN queue. And
yep.
I thought, this is heaven. So I just dove in and just started writing all this silly junk, basically. But
well, yeah. Well, I think that part is interesting because I can remember before Out of the Park, before, I mean, similar, I played all these weird board games and baseball simulations with dice and all,
Yeah.
whatever. And then I read this book that I thought was the greatest book that had ever been written. And it was the book by, was it Daniel Okrent, was the guy who wrote the first rotisserie
Oh, yeah, yeah.
book, right?
Right.
And the thing that I loved about it was not the aspect of owning baseball players and stuff. The thing that I loved about that book was the way that they wrote about their teams as if they were like real standalone teams with grudges against each other and all that other good stuff. So I've always been drawn to the fundamental aspect of the fictional thing. When I managed our first major rotisserie league, which current Jacksonville GM Greg Greathouse was a part of that,
Oh,
because we used to work together way back in the old days at Indianapolis. But and the main thing was, I mean, we did all the rotisserie league stuff, but we wrote our individual team newsletters that I distributed every week with the stats, and we
yeah,
were
that's awesome.
complaining at each other, and all those sorts of good stuff. So
I actually read that book, the rotisserie book, and I was struck by the same thing. I just love the idea of like all these, sort of, these rivalries across years, and
oh yeah,
the history of the franchises, and it was just the whole thing was just neat.
given that you like that kind of big picture or whatnot, when you came into both the PIBA and the BBA, I'm interested in this question. Coming into the league, it can be fairly daunting, I think, for a person to come into a league with 60 and 70 years of history. And PIBA is similar in this sense in these days because now they've been around for 20 or 30 years
Right.
of seasons, right? What did you find? What was your experience like in the process of coming into both of those leagues? And was there a difference?
Uh, well, yeah, kind of yes and no. I mean, PIBA was interesting because I took over the Scottish franchise, which I think had been it had a background in one of their offshoot league, their Japanese league, but no one had written much about them. I mean, as I went back, like their team queue was pretty empty, and going back, you had to really dig to find out anything about them. So to me, that was kind of nice because it was essentially a blank slate, and you could kind of make the team personality what you wanted. When I came into the Brewster, this was, I think, maybe the second or third season of Yumiba, but it was essentially Brett and me and then a number of the other franchises were being kind of babysat by BBA GMs, but there wasn't a whole lot being written, and that was kind of like having the whole league as your playground in a way. So I thought it was fun trying to go back and find out like who won the first All-Star game and that all that kind of nuttiness. And so I went through, I don't know, maybe 2/3 or 3/4 of that Yumiba season before I got tapped to join the BBA. And I kind of had to think long and hard about leaving Mumbai because I really enjoyed it. And, it was, and I was winning enough at that point that it was really, I was in first place for quite a bit of that season, which I think was just driving Brett bananas, which I really enjoyed. So at any rate.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said for that. I think that the joy of winning in a online league is accentuated and augmented over the joy of winning in a solo league because your ability to deal with the personalities of the other GMs and in the league as a whole.
Yeah.
So nothing is better than having a set of gentlemanly rivalries.
Yeah, exactly.
As far as that goes.
The BBA itself was a little bit of a different animal because, I came in kind of odd circumstances when Kyle stepped away and mid-season. And I think some people were kind of unhappy that Matt accepted his resignation as quickly as he did and gave the team to me. So there was a little bit of blowback on that. So, I mean, I actually sent an email to Kyle and told him, I'm not going to touch the team for a couple of days here. And if you decide you want to come back, that's cool. So, he was very nice, sent me an email and said, nope, go ahead, just have your way with it. And so, I did. I have, at this point, I think he'd probably be amazed that it's no longer in Huntsville. It's no longer emphasizes left-handed hitters. All the stuff he had built up, I kind of stripped away and tried to put my own stamp on it.
And I think that was wise. Anytime you come into an established situation under some duress, it's probably wise to take a few days of decompression time and just let things settle. But eventually you do have to kind of take charge. And, the conversation I had with Doug in one of our earlier GM's Corners is, at some point you have to take the team and make it yours. Otherwise, it's no fun.
Yeah. Well, and Huntsville had such an established reputation, with the left-handed hitting and the short right field porch and all that. I thought, well, maybe I can run with this. But I wasn't having fun, and I couldn't quite understand. I'm fairly new. I'm very new to competitive OTP, so a lot of what he had done I couldn't quite figure out, and I couldn't figure out the pitching staff. So I just thought, maybe the best thing to do would be, just kind of kick back, think about what I want to do with the team, and go with that. And of course, I made more than a few missteps along the way, but even those have been, kind of learning experiences. And to me, the most fun of it is writing about it anyway. So even something disastrous like, the Pavel Bure trade early on was, at first I was just kind of like, oh my God, what did I just do? But then I thought, like, well, let's have fun with it. And what would the radio call-in shows the next morning be like after a trade like that? So that was
without a doubt.
That was kind of fun.
Yeah, I think that is always a silver lining of the BBA cloud is that, if you take a gamble and something doesn't work out, it was actually quite a bit of fun for me when I came into the league in 2020. I think I was general managing Yellow Springs 9 for the last 3 games of the 2024 season. Yeah. So I came in and things were in kind of a crumbling rubble, but I was set up for a flow, right? Because the guy before me had essentially tanked in the most egregious way possible, which is why he lost his team.
Yeah.
But I was set up with some bullets, but I was also set up with some really crappy players for a couple years, and so it was quite a bit of fun to write stories about these guys who just were kind of misfits and nobodies and so forth. So when things go wrong, I throw my assistant general manager under the bus, and I'll yell at my managers, and I'll do all sorts of good stuff. And of course, losing in the Landis has become its own genre for me now. So,
yeah.
So talk to me about Vinny. How did Vinny come about?
Well, that was originally I thought. I was kind of thinking like I basically need the ownership in Huntsville wasn't particularly forthcoming with the budget. So I thought, well, I'll take advantage of the participation point rewards here and go with a new owner. But I thought, I wasn't sure whether Matt would really want the franchise to move at that point. But I thought, even if he doesn't, it would be really fun to have a guy from Chicago come in, buy the team, and be constantly threatening to move it. And then, what would the city be like? And, how would the players react? And then, so I kind of, in my head, I see Vinny as sort of a cross of like Vince Vaughn and Joe Pesci, and sort of kind of looks a little forbidding, but he's, kind of a clown, until he's not. And so
there you go.
I kind of do everything through that prism, like he can't remember anybody's name until you're a threat, and then he knows your name.
Exactly. Once it becomes important. Well, I'm having a great time bouncing back and forth and raising the stakes on each of the different of the whole operation blueprint, thriller, big shit, Benny, Heidi. That's a great deal of fun for me right now. I hope I'm not stepping on too many toes at points.
That's actually been a blast because I actually ended up having me resign as GM because I couldn't imagine like how I would have the sort of conversation I had with Vinnie and keep my job. So I thought, well, I don't know if this is I assume it's been done in the past because pretty much everything's been done in the BBA. But thought, well, I'll step away and he'll bring in his daughter-in-law. But it turns out I sort of see her. I think Heidi's become kind of a superhero in a way. She's sort of the Batwoman or Batgirl. I see Heidi as like a super. I see not Heidi. I see Benny as kind of a supervillain. She's very precise, very calculating, and she's doesn't take any guff off Vinny, and I don't know if you've seen this my response to your latest, but she was well aware of the bobblehead in the drawer and checked periodically.
Yep, I'm letting that settle.
I think she'll be. I hope they'll be worthy adversaries.
Yep, that's as soon as she came on the scene, I was going, okay, now there is something I need to work with. I'm not sure how to work with it yet, but that is a adversary of worth.
Because I sort of saw myself as kind of a bumbling, well-meaning, but sort of just way over my head, which reflects reality. But I see Benny as being like a lot more self-assured, and even if she's totally wrong, she's not going to let on that she's wrong. So,
oh, of course. Well, and she's not really totally wrong in many places so far.
So I think, but I think Vinny's just going to be increasingly annoyed. So that'll be fun.
Well, that'll be good. Alrighty, well let me do our traditional lightning round here. I'm going to throw you in the corner and strap you down and shine the bright lights in your eyes, and we'll make this really super snappy conversation that oftentimes doesn't become too super snappy. But I got a couple questions to ask you. OOTP history. What is your very best moment using OOTP? First thing that comes to your mind.
First thing that came to my mind was I did get the Cubs in a 1969 replay to within 2.5 of first at one point, and then they fell back. But I remember thinking, maybe I should just stop the replay here and take a screenshot and.
Kind of like real life, if they could have just stopped the replay at the 1st of August.
Yeah, that's still like one of the really tragic moments of my life, that season.
Favorite real life broadcaster?
Favorite real life broadcaster? Well, I'm tempted to say Harry Carey, but in reality, I grew up with Jack Brickhouse. And the back, hey, and that.
And Ernie Banks running the bases.
And Ernie Banks running the bases, and running. I think it's probably being charitable to Ernie at the point that I was watching him, but he, Brickhouse is sort of the soundtrack to my life. So,
favorite thing about the Out of the Park game?
I really enjoy the. Obviously the simulation is very detailed and spot on. I like the things they put in, like the clubhouse morale and all the little things that sort of bring personality to the game. And that just sort of helps me kind of riff on like, well, what's this guy like? The dreaded disruptive personalities, like, well, what would they do that would be so horrible? So I had a guy at one point who was putting tuna fish sandwiches in a locker and leaving them for days, and so the clubhouse would just smell horrendous. I did that in the Huntsville, one of my Huntsville TNs, and that sort of stuff is just fun.
Best player in the game today, BBA first, and then MLB.
Ooh, BBA first. The guy I really wish I had is the guy. God, I can't remember his name. The Russian pitcher for.
Danya Chekhanov.
He is formidable. And I keep running up against him and getting crushed. So I would put him on my list. Trout in real life is unbelievable. And a couple of years ago, I might have put Bryant in the conversation, but he's dropped off a bit. So I think Trout's still probably the guy.
I don't think Bryant is quite the pure natural athlete that Trout is.
No, that's for sure. Certainly not fluid in the field. So,
and maybe Mookie Betts is in that catery somewhere.
Mookie's pretty amazing too.
Favorite Chicago Cub memory?
Well, for me,
I've already talked about the worst case.
Well, for me, it's a very personal memory, and it didn't even happen in the season. I was a senior year in college, and I just on a flyer put in a request to the Cubs front office to interview Ernie Banks, and they came back like that afternoon and said, "Sure, come on down to Wrigley Field. He'll meet you." And so I went down, went to the entrance, and Ernie Banks was there meeting me in person. Took me out to the stands. We sat down the third base line. We were in the kind of real close to the field, and so I asked all my questions, and then when we were done, like an hour later, he said, "Want to come out in the field?"
Oh my!
And so he took me out. We went out to the pitcher's mound, and he talked about facing Bob Gibson.
Oh my goodness!
Said that was the only time that he really got nervous, was because he said Bob was just he was a great pitcher and also just a mean SOB. Yeah.
As a few of them were in the day, but Gibson obviously has the biggest reputation.
Yeah. And then we walked around the outfield. I touched the ivy. That was just an incredible afternoon. And I got to say, I mean, he was my boyhood hero growing up anyway. I just thought he was, he couldn't have been more gracious or more, forthcoming, or just, more Mr. Cub that afternoon.
Oh, there you go.
So he, kind of, a lot of times you meet your boyhood heroes and it's kind of a letdown, and it was anything but with Ernie.
Well, you have survived the lightning round, so congratulations for that. It is traditional that I turn the tables and allow you to put me in your own form of lightning round for a moment. If you have any questions that you would like me to, or anything you'd like me to talk about, I'm happy to do so. Otherwise, we can just skip right over that.
Well, I'm actually, because I'm kind of running my own little private science experiment in my minor leagues at this point with the coaches. Mm-hmm. I'm just curious what you think the actual worth of the coaching is in OOTP, how big an effect it has, and if you build up their teach hitting or teach pitching ratings, does that do anything, do you think, or is it all just artifice?
I think that they do something. The $64 million question is how much, and I think probably not a ton, but I think that they do a little bit. I can say that I have, throughout my different years of working with OTP in trying to essentially reverse engineer the game, right? I'm a software guy, engineer, systems engineer guy by background and thought, and so I love this out of the park game because it satisfies all of my techie and baseball sabermetric side, as well as my fiction writer's side, right? So I can bring any of those three things together.
Yeah.
It's very hard to design a good experiment to test what a manager does and what a coach does and so forth. I was able to do that a little bit with trainers because the result of injuries are actually fairly easy to extract and track. It's very hard to extract and track development, right? Ratings progression and talent progression, which is really what you're asking. Do managers make a difference, right? Or do coaches make a difference in the training and development, and do managers make a difference in their decisions during the game?
Right.
I've recently come to the conclusion that trainers do make a small but definable difference in injuries. I can't really figure out how to test coaches, but it seems logical that they would, especially because I have been able to test managers to a degree. I believe that a very solid, good manager makes a game or two's difference.
Right.
But I can't tell you exactly which of the traits of the manager make a individual difference or whether you have to roll them all together. It's just a big cloudy mess as far as that goes. But it does, when I do some testing, it does feel like managers actually do make a difference, but it's again very tiny. Trainers do make a difference, but again, it's very tiny. So it just seems it would be unwise to think that coaches don't make any difference.
Right.
Now, the big question is, if you're going to spend, are you going to spend $1 million on a coach versus somebody else who spends $200K? I don't know if that $800K difference is enough. If you could use that $800K somewhere else, maybe that would be better. But that's the beauty and the joy of the game. I mean, if you actually knew all the answers, what fun would that be? I just like to know the arrow is pointing in a certain direction, and then you and I can disagree about how hard it points. Right?
Yeah. Well, I guess I guess the way I've come to think of it is, I don't spend money on the coaches, but I do spend the participation points with the thought that my hope, I guess, is that if you've got like a pitching coach that's been bumped and you've got like a guy with, say, a stuck curveball, that maybe that would make a difference in unsticking it. So, and I don't know that that's true, but, that's my hope at this point. So
yeah, and it could well be. I don't know that it's true either. But I like, one of the things that I like about the participation point system myself, and obviously I've been a major partaker of it until you have started to overcome me. I need to up my game, Vic. But one of the things that I like about it is it fits into the context of the fictional world, right? I know that as a general manager, when I'm spending my PPT on different things, I am doing my very best. I'm doing everything that I can do as a general manager. And I almost look at that as if I'm spending points on a guy to send him to school to get more intelligent, it's like me calling him into the office and having a sit down with him and saying, hey, guy, I really believe in you. I really want you to work hard on this. I think you've got a great career, kid.
Yeah.
Right? Because I can't do that out of the park today in real life. I can't have a conversation with my players. So this is the only way that I can make that happen in my own brain, right?
Right. Well, see, to me, that that helps with the immersion, right? Because you can, if somebody's like loafing in real life, you wouldn't just sit there and let them loaf for their whole career. I mean, you'd call them in and say, hey, buddy, get going. Yeah. Which is so you can work on their work ethic or whatever. And to me, that just it makes you feel like a little bit more like you've got a real team of real guys that you're trying to help mold. And I really like that aspect of it. And whether any of that really makes a huge difference in how your team performs, I don't know. But it sure is fun to speculate about.
Right. And the fact that there are 2 or 3 things that I can point to that I can be relatively certain that do make a difference, even if they're not very big, means that I can then translate that and say, well, clearly it must make some kind of difference, so therefore what I'm doing is good.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Rather than just being stupid and silly and making my own stuff up. But that may be, could well be that work ethic may not actually change the development curves whatsoever. I can't tell. But as long as I hold out the idea of hope that it occurs, then I can not only then I can justify it in the gameplay as well as then translate it into the fiction piece and more importantly into my heart and soul about this guy.
Yeah. Well, we all need our delusions, Ron, and that's why I persist in thinking the Black Sox can win with 4 first basemen. So I think that's kind of the beauty of the game. You can
exactly. So where do you see Vic going as the assistant to the almost assistant to the assistant to the general manager of California? What's the career path for Vic Caleca from this point on?
I don't know. I had sort of thought that, well, my original feeling was that, he would go off and have kind of sit on a beach with, the two former managers who resigned in a huff over meeting at the Days Inn. Then, but then Doug hired me. So at this point, I guess I had thought eventually I'd come back, but now I'm not so sure. I think, Benny might carve a longer career than I thought, and I'm not sure Vinny would bring Vic back at this point.
Well, we'll see if Heidi has anything to say about how long Benny can stick around. That'll be fun.
And I'm sure you've noticed the seeds to Benny's destruction have been sown. So
if she can avoid them, though, you never know.
Yeah. She's
supervillains are super for for reasons.
Exactly.
And there's certain ebbs and flows to everything. So.
Yeah, well, I think, in my mind at least, she's pretty formidable. So we'll see.
Yes, definitely. And when I saw that you had resigned and gone off, I had some initial ideas of how I might twist that. But then when Doug hired you, I went, no, that's way better.
Yeah. Well, then the cross-pollination with the Kokerschmelz group has just been priceless.
Exactly.
And Doug's green-eyed woman is fascinating to me too. I want to try to work that in. All the Kokerschmelz groups, top officials have bright green eyes. I don't know.
Well, it's a comic book science fictional world, so
it is indeed. Yeah, I saw that. That was one of your descriptions of it, and that's perfect. It's a comic book world.
Yep, because it can't be exactly like ours. There's too many odd little weird things in there. But as soon as you shift your mind into this comic book, and suddenly I'm back in my uncle's old comic book boxes and pulling out, the latest soap opera that Iron Man is going through or whatever. So. Oh
yeah. Like I grew up on the Fantastic Four, so that was not comic book soap opera.
Exactly, 100%. Alrighty. Well, anything else that you would like to touch on before we call this episode a day?
Well, I guess the only thing I would say is at this point I am thoroughly annoyed with my big league team. So I'm pretty much lavishing all of my attention on my minor leagues. So. The Black Sox are just they're killing me at this point. So
that's what your BBA team is completely geared for. It kills everyone all the time.
It just oh my God, you build something you build a pitching staff you think is going to work, and then my last year's pitcher of the year. I called up as Pepe Jaramillo's projection is to go 0-27 this year. So I thought, that's just fabulous. And actually, at this point, I hope he makes it, because that would just be fantastic.
That would be quite the storyline.
It would be. It's all grist for the mill at this point.
Well, I appreciate your time here this afternoon, and we'll have to do this again.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, this was great. Thanks very much, Ron.
The Brewster Baseball Association is an out-of-the-park baseball league commissioned by Mr. America himself, Matt Rechtenwald, and competed in by an amazing group of outstanding general managers. Check us out at montybrewster.net. You have been listening to the GM's Corner, a podcast where we put BBA GMs on the hot seat. Music is Cool Piano by Tigerius and is used under Creative Commons Attribution License. See you next time. Until then, have fun, be safe, and always remember that even a boring team news is worth 2 points.